All right, so today we are going to be installing our wX7 5.5-inch handrail. We have this section of wall back here. We're going to show you the process start to finish from layout all the way to completion of the handrail. First things first, like most of these products, the very first task we have is to take a look at our wall section and do some layout. So in this scenario, we're going to go from an inside corner on this side, and our finished edge on this end is going to be this corner guard. You may have some instances where you're going from a door frame to a door frame, or even from an inside corner to an inside corner. Whatever it is you're looking for, the stopping point on both ends, then there's going to be some calculations from that measurement down to determine the actual finish length of the handrail and the finish length of its individual components. So for this scenario, for our handrail, what we would recommend is you're going to measure from your finished end to your finished end. And then in order to do our layout for our mounts, what we're going to do is start 7 inches in from each end. And then we're going to determine an appropriate spacing for our standoffs. This is something where you're going to refer to the plans and specifications for your projects. That's going to guide you on your minimum and maximum spacing for your mounts, what kind of backing is required for the handrail mounts. For this handrail specifically, we're going to be using standard wall anchors that we'll show you here in a moment. That is an industry standard installation. These are rated to be sufficient for ADA compliance for handrail usage. But as always, reference plans and specifications for your building, for your project, for your wall conditions that will give you a little bit more information as far as the layout and the types of fasteners that you're going to be using. So in order to get started, we're going to go ahead and measure and mark 7 inches from either end. We have already, ahead of this, set our laser up here. This laser for today's scenario is set at 34 inches. That number, again, is going to be dictated by the plans for the layout, for the design for your building. But keep in mind that installing a handrail, we do need to work hard to maintain compliance with ADA height and usage. So the 34-inch mark will put us within the height requirements for ADA handrails. Now that we have our 7-inch spacing from each end, Matt's going to go through and take a look at that middle section that's left over and determine an appropriate spacing for the standoffs. For this, again, we're looking for a minimum and maximum spacing requirement, something between roughly 10 inches and a maximum of, let's say, 24 inches. Some plans, some architect specifications will vary. So in this scenario, we have the freedom to decide the spacing, whatever is a good round number that gets us an evenly spaced number of standoffs. So Matt's going to go ahead and lay out the middle standoffs now, making marks along the laser line at the measurement that he determines is a good even spacing for those standoffs. In this scenario, for this handrail using these anchors, we are not going to need to locate studs along the wall. Typically, you would have some form of a backer pre-installed behind the wall, but you do not need one with these mounts. We're generating enough strength from the actual fastener that we don't need to look for a stud and space our standoffs accordingly, which is a big benefit of this system. So now that we have our layout, we're going to go ahead and begin drilling. To use these, so these are going to be toggle wall anchors that are heavily rated for this type of usage. In order to install these, we need to drill a 1/2-inch sized hole into the drywall. It's going to allow space for this toggle to go through. Once it passes through the wall, we can straighten it and we'll pull tight against the drywall, and we will break off, as you'll see in a moment, the end here. This will allow us later to attach our mount to that. So on his marks, Matt's going to go ahead and lay out and drill the holes with a 1/2-inch drill bit going through the drywall. As you're doing this process, obviously, keep in mind, depending on your building's layout and location, you do need to be aware of what's behind the wall. Whenever possible, you can drill slowly and carefully to make sure that you're not going to run into any sort of penetration, plumbing pipe, conduit behind the wall. It is important when drilling these to make sure that we're keeping the center of the hole dead on our laser line here. Any variance in that hole, if the drill bit were to walk, that is going to make installation more difficult down the road, as the handrail will need to be flexed a little bit to follow that line. So it makes it a little bit easier if we pay very close attention when we drill these holes. All right, so now that we have our holes drilled in our wall here, our next step is to install our toggles. In order to do that, I'm going to come into my hole here. With these specific types of toggles, we're going to straighten the toggle out by pulling on the tabs at the back. That will point this end where it can fit through the hole. We'll go ahead and shove that through the hole. When I'm pulling backwards, I can feel that I'm fully through the drywall. So I'll use these 2 tabs, align them flush, and pull backwards. And now I can feel that the metal end of the toggle is flush against the backside of the drywall. For this specific design, what I'm then going to do is push the stop collar down while pulling backwards on this tab. The stop collar will fit into the 1/2-inch hole, and if I give it a little bit more of a tug, then we'll see it flush to the drywall here and flush inside the hole. At that point, the toggle installation is complete, and for this specific version of these toggles, all I need to do is rock this back and forth in order to break off the excess tail of the toggle there. This is now fully installed and ready for my standoff. To install the standoff, we're going to be using a bolt that is sized specifically to reach through this standoff, through the drywall, and grab the toggle threads on the back. The standoff looks like this. It's going to be oriented in this direction with the support foot facing down towards the bottom. On the back side, we have some alignment tabs that will help keep the standoff aligned into the drywall, keep it from rotating during the installation process. So first, I will thread this bolt through the hole in the standoff, put it into the hole till I can feel that I'm touching, and then I'm going to slide my standoff up, verify that I am as vertical as possible. I need to be close to plumb for the standoff to line up with the handrail. At that point, I can give it a push into the drywall, which will stick it a little bit in there to keep it from rotating, and I'm ready to bring my drill up and tighten this bolt down. It's important to begin this process with gentle pressure until you feel the threads catch on the toggle. At that point, I can finish installing. And ensure that my standoff is fully seated. You do want to look at the outside edges here to make sure you tighten your bolts sufficiently. We want this standoff to be drawn completely flush into the drywall. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of bowing in the drywall there. You don't want to over tighten, but you do want to make sure that it is fully seated around all the edges to ensure a sturdy fit. So now that our standoffs are up, we're going to determine our total installed length of our handrail, which will determine our cut lengths of the individual components. And that's going to be based off of, again, referring back to the design plans and specifications. A common scenario is to have a 2-inch space between an outside or an inside corner before the handrail begins. And then at that point, we're going to have our return installed and then the handrail itself. So we do need to subtract a little bit from each end to determine an appropriate spacing according to our designs. And we have already done that for this location, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to cutting the material to fit this layout. All right, so now that we have cut our materials to size, our next step is to pre-install the T-slot adapters into the back of the aluminum retainer. So the front is the hollow section here. On the back side of the aluminum retainer, we have our T-slot running directly down the center. These T-slot adapters are going to interface between the aluminum retainer and the standoffs that we've mounted on the wall to lock them together. So to install those, we're going to insert them into this T-slot here. We do need to be careful to pay attention to the fact that these have a top and a bottom. The T-slot adapters have a flat face that needs to be facing upwards. They all need to be facing upwards consistently along the retainer, so we'll be careful to keep those aligned. The aluminum retainer itself is symmetrical, so I just need to ensure that as I install these, I'm keeping them all facing one direction or the other. Either direction would suffice. Our pro tip for this portion of the installation is to make adjustments and inserting these T-slots a little bit easier. I'm going to insert a very small amount of lubricant, something like WD-40 or silicone lubricant, into the beginning of the aluminum retainer. That will allow me, when I insert this T-slot in there, these will slide down to their locations, and it will allow me to make some adjustments on the wall. Once I've added the handrail to the wall, if we need to recenter it, we can do that a little bit more easily. So we'll go ahead and pre-install or insert all of our T-slots into our retainer. We're going to go ahead and count that we have 5 on the wall and we have 5 in the retainer, and then we will roughly space them out here just to facilitate our installation. Once we have done that, we're able to move on to pre-installing the returns onto the retainer. We need to insert the T-slots first because the returns are also going to install into this T-slot channel along the back. So once we install those, the T-slots are locked into place. So our handrail returns for this have an alignment tab in the center here, and we have pre-installed our T-nut and fastener into that tab. We have these reference faces here that are going to help align the cover and keep this flush to the aluminum retainer. So I'm going to take this washer in the middle, align it straight, and then I'm going to insert the washer into the C-slot with the fastener on top, push this flush, and then we can go ahead and tighten down that fastener, locking the retainer and the return together. We'll repeat the same process on the other end. At this point, with our returns installed and the correct number of T-slot adapters installed, we're going to go ahead and bring the retainer to the wall location. This is a two-person job. We're going to go from both ends and work to align these adapters up with our standoffs. So we'll each take it in here. Again, we're ensuring that our T-slots are going to be oriented with the flat face facing upwards. We'll move over to the wall. And beginning from one end, we'll start on Matt's end down here. He's going to take his T-slots, align it to the standoff, and then holding that one partially in, continue to work his way down, moving each T-slot, adjusting it to the correct location to line up into standoff. Repeating that process till all of our T-slots are in the standoffs. You can see once the last one went in, the retainer, the entire assembly moves flush to the wall, but it's still floating. It's loosely mounted on the wall. At this point, we now want to verify that our handrail is centered in its location. So from each end, we'll take a quick measurement and verify that the spacing that we determined ahead of time is still correct. Once it's aligned, we want to be careful not to move it, and we can move on to locking the retainer in its location with the T-slots. If we had mounted this retainer and it was not centered and we needed to make some adjustments, this is where the little bit of lubricant we put in ahead of time comes into play. So at this point, without this being locked in, I'm able to, if this measurement was off, I'm able to slide the entire unit left and right on the floating T-slots within that track. There is some limit to that adjustability, but it does provide you a tool to simply mount it without paying attention to the measurement, and then afterwards verify your location, make the adjustment, and lock it into place. So once we have it in the secure location, we're going to move on to using our locking pins to attach the T-slot and the T-slot adapters together, which will lock the entire assembly to the wall. So these pins come with the kit, and they are made to only be inserted in one direction. There's an alignment tab along the side of the pin that references to an alignment slot in the T-slots and the T-slot adapters. So it'll be pretty obvious which direction these go in. And these serve basically as a locking wedge. So as they enter, they're going to draw the entire assembly tight together into alignment. And when we finally snap them all the way into place, they will lock those in where they cannot be removed. By hand, you would need a tool to disassemble. So in order to do that, we're going to come to the wall, putting some forward pressure on the retainer. I'm going to insert the pin into its slot and press it down. By hand, you will only be able to go part of the way, so we'll move the rest of the way down into location, inserting these all partially to verify alignment. Now that all of our pins are partially installed, what we need to do is lock them into place. The final part of this process does require us to hammer these pins down all the way till they're seated flush with the standoff surface here. In order to do that, it's a little bit dangerous for the wall surface for us to actually attempt to hammer down inside here. So we typically will use some form of a punch. Usually for us, this is just a block of wood of some kind that will help us. It's a soft material that will not damage the pin or the standoff, but it's something we can use to hammer that down into place. So Matt's going to use our extension here and to bring that down till it's touching the pin and tap it, verifying that it's bottomed out on the standoff. All right, so now all of our pins are fully seated in the standoff. This retainer and the entire assembly is locked solid to the wall. If for some reason we needed to make adjustments to this, if we had missed a step, if we needed to change something, or if we needed to remove it from the wall, we are simply going to come underneath the entire assembly, and with a screwdriver or a small punch, we're going to tap the pins upward. This will release them from their locations, which will allow us to, just as we, in the reverse of install it, to remove the entire retainer off the wall without doing any damage to the wall or any of the surfaces or mounts. All right, now with our retainer fully locked in, we're going to verify the measurement from return to return, which we've already done for this piece here. At this point, we should already have this cut to size, but if you needed to make some adjustments, we can remove the retainer off the wall and adjust the returns in and out to allow, or you can cut the cover to fit, whichever is more efficient for the scenario. So at this point, our next step before we install the final cover is to install our impact absorber. This is going to snap into the middle channel here. This is cut shorter so that it stays behind out of the way of the returns here. So Matt's going to install that by hanging one edge and then working his way down from one end, snapping it in. We verify that it's locked in place, working our way all the way down. This impact absorber for this assembly serves to keep the cover supported, as well as being a bumper for direct impact to the side of the handrail, since this handrail is meant to function both as a handrail and a wall bumper. Once that's done and we verified that our cover is correct, we'll bring the cover up and we'll begin at the top by hanging the cover over the edge. We'll seat it flush with our return and we will work the edge down, hooking it over the bottom ledge of the retainer. Last step is that we're going to verify that our fitment is flush from the return to the cover. If we had gaps, again, we can go back and adjust the return or make adjustments to the length of the cover if necessary. But at this point, we're ready to wipe this down and assembly and installation is complete.